Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel and today I'm going to talk about, I'm going to sort of do a mid-year wrap up. I'm going to talk about some of my reading stats for the year so far, and I'm going to do the Mid-Year Freakout Tag, which I think is kind of a funny name to give it this tag because I'm not really freaking out about anything. This is it's just a tag of questions to sort of help recap the year so far and get a grip on where I'm at and where I want to be. So that's what I'm gonna do. So first of all, I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of my reading stats for the year so far, because I'm doing quite well in 2024. Last year was a bit of a downer year for me, or I didn't do very well on most of my goals in 2023, in large part because it was just kind of an emotionally difficult year for me. But 2024, I have bounced back pretty significantly. I've said before in previous videos that, like, my rule of thumb is to set a 50 book goal for the year as like my overall, this is how many books that I, want to read in the whole year. As of June 30th this year, I read 57 books, so I've already blown past my yearly goal. So anything else on top of that is just gravy, as far as I'm concerned. And that's fine. Again, like last year, I did not hit my 50 book goal. I only read, like, I don't know, it was less than 40 books, I think. But, all of these things, keep in mind that, like, as a particularly avid reader, I'm kind of an outlier in that, reading this much is unusual. Anytime I feel like I'm falling behind in something, I just remind myself that, like, most people don't read much at all, if ever. And so, like, only reading 20 or 30 books, or only reading 50 or 60 books, or only reading X number of books is pretty much always going to be pretty great compared to like the average person. So but yeah, so as of June 30th, I read 57 books. I've actually added a couple more to that just since the beginning of this month, but we're going with my stats from January 1st to June 30th. I did also set a page goal of 20,000 pages, and I am ahead of schedule on that as well. As of June 30th, I believe I had about 13,000 pages read as of June 30th. So, and I've added more to that since then. So I'm about 60, I was about 65% of the way towards my goal by the end of June, which is, again, pretty good. I'm keeping pace. I've also been very good at reading every day. So I'm currently on a little over 200 day-long reading streak, which I started back towards the end of 2023 and has been going this entire period. So I'm in the middle of that, of possibly my longest daily reading streak ever, which is great. I've also listened to about 200 or so, a little more than 200 hours of audiobooks this year so far. Storygraph tells me my average time to finish a book is 6 days, which, yeah, that sounds about right. Again, some books are much faster, some books take me a little bit longer to read. So that makes sense for me, that it's a little bit less than a week on average. Because again, some books I fly through in a day or two, and some books I sit on for a couple of weeks. Yeah, so my moods, I really like the mood thing that Storygraph does. Fully like a quarter of what I read falls under the adventurous mood. My other top moods are mysterious, dark, emotional, and funny. So, needless to say, I like a lot of different kinds of moods in my books. um, but yeah, I do like adventuresome books. I like moody books. I like dark books. I like funny books. I like books that are darkly funny. Um, so yeah, that's my mood breakdown. Um, it's been mostly fiction. I've only read a 10% nonfiction. Yeah, I've only read like 6 nonfiction books so far this year. The rest has all been fiction, which is fine. I'm sure I'll read a little bit more nonfiction. If you've watched my previous videos, the last couple videos where I did a haul of the books that I bought when I was on vacation, you'll know that I just recently, and also the video before that, in which I bought some books at a library sale. I've picked up several more nonfiction books to read that are now in my physical TBR. So I would expect to see some more nonfiction popping up in my reading as I work my way through my physical TBR. My top genres are not a surprise at all. The vast majority of what I read, well, not the vast majority, but definitely more than half of what I read falls broadly under the fantasy genre. And then it's followed by like science fiction, historical fiction, romance, and mystery. So that's pretty normal for me. Like, I pretty much read genre fiction for the most part. But then, then I get down to like literary fiction, some classics, because I've been reading some classics this year, which I've been enjoying greatly. So yeah, most of what I read is print. Almost half of it is audio. I read very little digital. I think I've read one digital book all this so far this year, and the rest has been relatively evenly divided between print and audio. I've said before, this is, again, completely normal for me. I read, a lot of the reason why I read so much print is because I spend so much time staring at screens all the time. My job is primarily me staring at screens. Many of my hobbies are also about primarily staring at screens, and so I like to have one or two hobbies that I don't have to stare at a screen for, so I particularly like reading print books when possible. I'm not against digital books by any means. I just personally prefer print. But yeah, I do also listen to a fair amount of audiobooks because my job allows me to do that. So almost all of the audiobooks I listen to at work while I'm doing my job. So that explains why I have so many audiobooks as well. And also, like, again, I would not have nearly as many books read this year if my job wasn't chill enough to allow me to listen to audiobooks a lot of the time. I've also been reading a lot of authors multiple times this year. I'll get into some of this in the mid-year tag. But of course, I've read 4 books by Sir Terry Pratchett as I'm working my way through the Discworld novels. And I've read 3 each by C.L. Polk. Leigh Bardugo now. Leigh Bardugo has entered my most read authors list as of just this past month. And Ann Leckie. And I've read, 2 books by a bunch of different authors like Becky Chambers, Martha Wells, Heather Fawcett, Robin Hobb, T. Kingfisher. There's a lot of authors that I've read multiple books of this year. So that's, I think that's interesting. I don't know that it's necessarily, I don't know what to say about that necessarily, except to say that I've been doing better with, like, particularly with reading books in the series and keeping up with those series and trilogies and duologies, and that explains a lot of why I've been reading so many authors multiple times is because I've been getting a lot better about keeping up with the series and the trilogies that I have been reading. So I would expect to have even more authors sort of on that list of authors that I've read multiple books from in the same year. As we get to the end of the year, I expect to have even more and to read even more books by many of those authors, right? By the end of the year, I probably will have read several more books by Terry Pratchett. I will probably have read several more books by Robin Hobb, because those are authors that I'm like currently working through longer series by. Yeah, so that's another thing that pleases me. Like, seeing the number of authors that I'm doing multiple reads of shows me that it helps to show me that like I am keeping up with a lot of these series a lot better than I feel like I had been previously. So there we go. My average star rating is 4.26, which, yeah, that sounds about right. I tend to give lots of books I read 4 stars. Like a lot of the books I read, I'm like, yeah, I really like that book. It wasn't perfect, but I really liked it, so I give it 4 stars. My average rating tends to be pretty high because, if you've seen any of my previous videos, you've probably heard me say that if a book I'm reading is going to be less than 3 stars, like if I'm disliking it enough that it would not be a 3-star read, at least, I'm almost certainly going to DNF that book. So like I almost never finish a book and then rate it 2 stars or less, because if it's a 2-star or less book, I'm not going to finish it. It's not going to be a book that I'm going to finish reading because I don't have time for that. If it's 2 stars or less, I'm not enjoying it, and I'm therefore not going to waste my time with it. So basically my stats so far this year bear that out. I have not rated anything below 3 stars, and I only have given one book 3 stars, and everything else has been at least a 3.5 star read, and most of them have been 4-star reads. Like almost half of what I've read has been 4-star reads for me. Because again, like I mostly just, and like for me, star ratings is just, it's kind of just about vibes, you know. Again, it's like, did I enjoy the book? Yeah. Was it perfect? No, most books aren't perfect, but some of them are. But most books I read, I enjoy a lot. Wasn't perfect, 4 stars, you know, like that's just kind of how that works for me. If it's a book that I'm like, wow, that was really awesome, and I can't think of anything I had a problem with, then 5 stars. And I'm pretty generous with 5 stars as well. I think I've given like I've given 18 books 5 stars this year. So I'm not like, I'm not stingy about giving high ratings to books. If I enjoy it, I'm giving it a high rating. If I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to finish it, and I'm not going to rate it at all. So that's kind of where I sit on the ratings thing. Obviously, you know, star rating is a completely made up thing, and I don't take it seriously. So that's just how that goes. As far as the specific reading challenges that I'm doing this year that are beyond just how many books I'm reading this year, the only one that I'm really like focusing on, I would say, is the R Fantasy Bingo board challenge, which I'm doing very well on. I've got 5 prompts already completed from that challenge, and I'm nearly done with number 6, so and I'll be moving on to number 7 very quickly. So that's, I think I'm pretty well on track to get that done by, you know, the end of March 2025. So that should not be a problem. Most of the like the story graph challenges that I signed up for at the beginning of the year, I've kind of left in the dust. I'm not really worried about them. This is kind of how it goes with me, where I sign up for a bunch of challenges, or I set up a bunch of challenges or lists or TBRs at the beginning of the year. I feel really gung-ho about it. I start all of them. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to definitely do all of these. And then within 3 to 4 months, I just kind of peter out on a lot of them. That is kind of how I feel about a lot of these. The Storygraph Reads the World, the Storygraph Genre Challenge. You know, if I feel like it, I'll read some books from these TBRs. Again, as I've said before, obviously these are not to be taken seriously. I don't worry about them very much. If I am not enjoying them or I don't feel the need to read them, I'm not going to do it, as I'm primarily a mood reader anyway. So the only other one that I'm sort of still tracking and planning to continue tracking is my classics TBR for the year. I have fallen a little bit behind on that because I started reading Great Expectations in May. I didn't quite finish it until the beginning of June, and then I did not get to another classic in June, so I've still only read 5 out of my 12, so I'm just a little bit behind on the classics, but I am still planning to read more classics this year. I have several that I'm looking at that I have in my physical TBR that or that I'm planning to pick up at some point. So I'm still definitely going to be doing that, but I am a little bit behind on that. But yeah, otherwise, I think I'm doing great on the Our Fantasy Book Bingo so far, and I plan to continue doing that. So, with all that having been said, let's get into the Mid-Year Freakout Tag, which has some really interesting and thought-provoking questions in it, I think, which will help me to sort of assess some of the things that I've looked at this year and read this year. So the first question is probably the most obvious one, which is, what's the best book you've read so far this year? And for me, that's kind of tough because, as I said, like, most of the books I read I really like. There's definitely some standouts, though. I will say probably the one that, like, I still think about the most is Cahokia Jazz by Frances Spufford. It was so well written. The characters were so compelling. The world was so good. It was an instant 5-star read for me. And so yeah, I'm going to use that one as the answer to this question. The next question is, what's the best sequel you've read so far this year? And that one was actually a pretty easy one to answer. It's pretty much hands down Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. I've just started getting into Realm of the Elderlings this year, and yeah, they're great. This book was so good. It was so engrossing. For being so long, it did not take me long to read it at all because I was just very into it and I was willing to drop everything to continue reading this book. So yeah, as a follow-up to the first one, which I also really loved, it hits everything for me. Pretty much a pitch perfect sequel, and I've read a lot of sequels this year so far, so this one is easily the standout among a lot of other really good sequels. So yeah, definitely Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. The third question is a new release that you haven't read yet but really want to. So presumably this means a book released in the first half of 2024 that I have not yet read. There's probably a couple. Like, I've actually read a few 2024 releases, which again is a little bit odd for me. I tend not to worry about keeping up with new releases as they come out. I just sort of get to books when I get to them. It's not something I concern myself with all that much. But I have read a few already this year, and there are a couple more new releases from the past few months that I definitely want to get to but haven't yet. So one of them would be Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner. This, of course, is the sequel to Godkiller, which I just read in June, and I really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, I'd like to get to Sunbringer pretty soon as the follow-up to that. And another one would be The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Jelly Clark. This is another recent release from an author that I really enjoy. I've read Master of Jinn, and I really love the world that he crafted there, and so I'm really interested to see what, The Dead Cattail Assassins does, what he does with that, because I really like P. Jelly Clark's writing style. So there's definitely a couple there. The fourth question is the most anticipated release for the rest of 2024. So this is a book that will be released sometime before the end of 2024 that I am most anticipating. And again, I can't say that there's always lots of books coming out that I want to read and that immediately go on my sort of to read pile on Storygraph, and that immediately sort of get added to the list. But it's relatively rare for me to find a book that I'm like, yes, I absolutely need to read that pretty much when it comes out. No holds barred. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. But this year there actually is one that I'm kind of like feeling that way about. And that is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. This is the follow-up to The House in the Cerulean Sea. And I really, really, really liked The House in the Cerulean Sea. It was one of my favorite books that I read, and I read it in 2022, but that might be wrong. It might have been 2023. I don't know. It's one of my favorite books I've read in the past couple of years. I really love, it's like a warm blanket, you know, it's very sweet. It's very cute. The characters are great. It's very romantic. It's very queer. I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm really, really interested in reading the follow-up just because, again, it feels like going back to that world will sort of feel like being wrapped up in a nice cozy blanket with a mug of hot cocoa. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm pretty sure it comes out in September. So yeah, I'm highly anticipating that release. The fifth question is, what is the biggest disappointment you've had so far this year? And for me, this is a little bit different of a question than just saying, like, what's the worst book you've read this year? Which I actually like, because I don't like talking about worst books I've read, but I am potentially interested in talking about disappointments, right? Because, yeah, to me, a disappointment is a book that I expected to like a lot more than what I actually ended up liking it. So this question works a lot better for me than just talking about what is the worst book I read this year so far, just because, as I said before, if I'm not liking a book, I will just DNF it, right? But I will, you know, continue to read a book even if it doesn't meet some expectation that I have of it. So probably the book that I would consider my biggest disappointment was probably The Antique Hunter's Guide to Murder by C.L. Miller. This was a fun little contemporary murder mystery. It was a debut, and a pretty recent release that I sort of randomly discovered on the library website based primarily on the cover and the title. And it just seemed fun and neat. And I was really excited about it. And honestly, the writing was pretty mediocre. It didn't quite live up to the idea of it that I built up in my imagination before I read it. It was fine, but it wasn't mind-blowing. It might also have been because part of it may have been because I read it pretty much immediately after another book that I really, really, really enjoyed, and so it was kind of a letdown because of that. The next question is, what is the biggest surprise so far this year? And again, for me, this is kind of the opposite of the biggest disappointment thing, right? This is the one where, what's a book that I went into with few to no expectations, and then it shocked me. And this one I'm going to have to do a repeat on. I try not to repeat too many books when I do these tags, but this one is definitely like the biggest surprise for me this year was Cahokia Jazz by Frances Spufford. This is largely because I didn't even really know it existed, and in the course of about a couple of weeks, I saw it on I saw it mentioned on a YouTuber's channel. It was on a long list for an award of some kind, and I was like, that seems like an interesting premise. So I found it at my library, and within a couple of weeks, I had devoured it, and it was insanely good. It was like just the fastest that a book has gone from being completely unknown to me to being one of the best books I've read so far this year, that made it a surprise. So that's why I feel like that about that one. The seventh question is, favorite new to you author. I have several new to me authors this year, and a few that I've read multiple books from. So this would be kind of tough, except that one of those authors is Robin Hobb, and I just really, really like Robin Hobb's writing. I really love the way she writes characters. I really love the detail of her world building. I love the lushness of her prose. Um, I'm just really into that. Runners up, though, would be like Heather Fawcett. I really have been really enjoying the Emily Wilde books. Also Martha Wells, because I've been really enjoying the Murderbot books. But yeah, Robin Hobb is just kind of the standout so far this year. So there's not really much competition there, frankly, in terms of authors that are new to me and new favorites. The next question is, do I have a favorite or current fictional crush? And yes, but not from books. I don't usually develop crushes on book characters. But I do develop crushes on characters that I romance in RPGs that I play. So right now I have a big crush on Astarion and Halsin in Baldur's Gate 3, because those are the characters I'm romancing in Baldur's Gate 3. And yes, I am romancing both of them. Yes, you can romance both of them, and it's very fun. So yeah, I'm into them. I'm also very, very interested in and crushing hard on Lucanus, Emmerich, Harding, Nev, and basically all of the new characters in the upcoming Dragon Age Veilguard game, which is it's going to be very difficult for me to decide who to romance first in that game, because I already have a huge crush on all of those characters, and I cannot wait to get to know them better and decide who I want to romance first. So yeah, I don't really have fictional crushes on book characters, but I do have some fictional crushes on video game characters. Let's put it that way. What's my newest favorite book character? My newest favorite book character this year, and I mean, that's got to be the Fool from the Realm of the Elderlings. I love me an enigmatic genius disguised as a crazy person that nobody takes seriously, and who secretly knows more than everybody else, and who is probably pulling some strings in the background, and who has a potentially very compelling backstory. So like, the Fool is like a character that was made for me to just be like obsessed over. So that's, again, that's sort of a no-brainer for me, frankly. What is a book that made you cry is the next question. I'm pretty easy. It's pretty easy to get me to cry these days. I used to pride myself on not doing that, but I cry over fictional things all the time, frankly, so it's not that difficult. A few of them that have made me cry this year so far: The Japanese Lover by Isabel Allende. It was very sad, a lot of ruminations on mortality, and I read it, around the anniversary of my dad's death, so it was certainly making me feel a lot of things. The Lonely Book by Meg Gran. This is a middle grade magical realism book about self-identity and figuring out who you are and being loved for who you are, and that stuff just always gets me. A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. The monk and robot duology is very philosophical, but it's also very much about figuring out who you are and what you want to do with your life and finding self-fulfillment. And yeah, it definitely made me feel a lot of things and brought a tear to my eye at some points. And also, like Great Expectations by Charles Dickens made me cry. His prose is often very lovely, and he's so aware of like the plight of people who are less privileged and who are working class and lower class and the poor, that it just, like, it works for me. So those are just some examples. There's probably more, honestly. I cry pretty easily at books, and I'm not really ashamed of that. It doesn't, I'm okay with being an emotional person and being keyed into those emotions. The next question: a book that made you happy. I'm going to stick to some sort of lighthearted books. Obviously, reading in general makes me happy. Reading any good book makes me happy. But I'm going to stick with books that are lighthearted and upbeat and leave you feeling good about the world. Primarily books like that would be, for me this year, it's been like the Discworld books. So this is Mort. Mort is probably my favorite one that I've read so far, but, you know, there'll definitely be even better ones down the line. But yeah, Discworld is just, it's so funny. I always am going to have a laugh when I read these books, and it's always going to leave me feeling a little bit better about the world, because Sir Trey Pratchett was, for all that he understood humanity and knew that humanity was not always great, he was also fundamentally an optimist. And it comes through in his writing very often. So, yeah. So Discworld made me happy. Discworld always makes me happy. And also, the Emily Wilde books. This is my copy of Map of the Otherlands. I actually lent my copy of Encyclopedia of Fairies to my sister, so she has it right now to read. But yeah, these books made me very happy as well. They're just delightful. Emily Wilde is a great character. Yeah, all the characters are really great. I love the fairy lore in them. And they're fun, they're enjoyable, they're a little bit romantic. They're great. And they definitely make me happy. The next question is, favorite book to screen adaptation. It's funny because pretty much all of the adaptations I've watched so far this year are books that I've not read. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to name some. Shogun is an incredible television show, and absolutely 100% worth your time, whether you've read the book or not. I've not read the book yet. I may at some point. But yeah, I mean, that it's very good. Another one is Interview with the Vampire. The current adaptation, television adaptation of Interview with the Vampire is, yeah, it's kind of an obsession at this point. It's really, really good. The actors are all bringing their A games. It's very emotional. It's very queer. It's very brutal. It's very, you know, it's very much a deeply psychological look at the depths of humanity, and the depths to which people can fall, and occasionally the heights to which they can rise. It's very good. The next question is, like, what's the prettiest book that you've added to your collection this year so far? And I mean, that's also a pretty easy one for me to answer. It's definitely this enormous, beautiful omnibus of American Gods graphic novels that I picked up, deeply discounted. Just the sleeve that it comes in is absolutely gorgeous. It's a lovely book. I'm not going to pull it out because it's a lot to deal with, but that's definitely the prettiest. The other one is clearly this illustrated copy of The Lord of the Rings that my friend gave me, though I'm not sure if this counts because I can't remember if I got this at the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024, but it's a beautiful book. I love it. It's illustrated with illustrations by the author, so yeah, it's great, and it's one of my favorite books in my collection right now. So probably those two. And then the last question is, what are books that you still need to read in 2024? And I mean, apart from all of them, which is always true, I always want to read all the books. I've said before, like, my to read pile on Storygraph has got like 500 books in it or something, and it pretty much never goes down, because for every book that I remove from that list, I probably add 5 or 10 more. So it pretty much always only grows. But, you know, in general, like, books that I need to read in the rest of 2024, books for our fantasy bingo card are probably, like, sort of the top priority. So, like, if it falls under one of the prompts for the Our Fantasy bingo card, that's probably a book that I'm going to try to prioritize. And also, of course, the series that I'm reading. I want to definitely continue to keep up with the series that I'm reading. I'm, in fact, considering making a spreadsheet for the first time in my life, making a spreadsheet for fun, just to help me better track the series that I'm reading, the series that I finished, the series that I've DNF'd, the series that I want to start. just to sort of better track that. I am tracking 3, a distinct series on Storygraph itself, of course. I'm The Realm of the Elderlings, Discworld, and the History of Middle-earth books. And I've been making progress on all 3 of those. But yeah, there's other series that I'm reading, like the Murderbot Diaries, and a lot of trilogies, duologies. Of course, when you're reading a lot of fantasy and sci-fi fiction, there's a lot of series and a lot of duologies and a lot of trilogies and a lot of sequels, and I would like to be able to better track what I'm doing and what I'm keeping up with. So I may do that just to see how I'm faring and to help better track that. And also just the books on my physical TBR. My physical TBR is getting a little bit unwieldy again. So my physical TBR is on a separate little bookshelf away from the rest of my books, so that I can at a glance sort of look at it and be like, oh yeah, it's getting a little big. It's like spilled onto a second shelf on the bookshelf. So we're definitely going to have to chip away at that. Fortunately, a lot of the books on my physical TBR, I've tried to put a number of books on my physical TBR in as sort of prompts for the R Fantasy bingo card. So a lot of those books will be killing 2 birds with 1 stone if and when I get to them. But yeah, and again, just continuing all these series that I'm reading. I do need to get back to Realm of the Elderlings. I'm already falling behind on that because I've been trying to follow Leanne, her Elderlings read along, and I missed the 3rd one for Assassin's Quest. I still have to read Assassin's Quest, and then I have to read is it The Ship of Fools, or one of the first book in the Live Ship Traders is the one that will be next. So I have 2 of those books that I need to sort of hurry up and get to. But yeah, so Realm of the Elderlings is probably going to try to take some priority for me, just because I'm trying to follow along with Leanne, because I want to participate in some of her live streams, because I've really enjoyed those, and I do want to keep up with that at the sort of the pace that she's set, which is 1 every 2 months or so, which again should be doable. It's just that, like, again, my vacation just kind of threw everything off in my schedule, so I've got a little bit of catching up to do with some of those things. Yeah, otherwise, that is the tag. If you have any thoughts or opinions on the books I've talked about, if you have any responses to some of the questions that you want to share with me, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you want to, like this video, if you want to subscribe to my channel for more chats and reviews about books, I would love to have you. And yeah. Otherwise, I hope you're having a great summer and staying cool. Bye.